Okay, let's talk about the organelles. So one thing that I like to look at this kind of from a functional perspective. So let's ask the question of if anybody has ever heard of being lactose intolerant. So what is being lactose intolerant? What does that mean? Have you ever wondered? I don't know. Maybe you yourself are intolerant. Every human being at one time was lactose intolerant. The whole population of the earth until one day somebody developed the ability to create a persistent lactase enzyme and we could basically continue to drink milk. And because of milk having a lot of fat in it, has a lot of calories, has a lot of nutrients in it, we could basically unlock all of those nutrients. And it gave whoever had this ability to drink the milk an evolutionary advantage. And that's why it has persisted today. But there are still lots of people out there that are lactose intolerant. Generally, if you have a lot of African cultures, a lot of places from Asia, so they have the inability to process a lot of dairy. And if you think about it, you look at like Japanese cuisine, or if you look at like Thai cuisine, or you look at Vietnamese cuisine, there's not a lot of dairy in those cuisines, and it's because there is a lot of lactose intolerance. So what does lactose intolerance mean? Well, what happens if somebody's lactose intolerant and they drink milk? Well, what will happen is that they'll drink this milk and they'll get bloated and they'll have gas and they maybe diarrhea and they feel very bad. My buddy Mike is lactose intolerant, and I remember we'll go out for ice cream and he's like, "It's worth it." It's like it's worth it to eat the ice cream. I'm like, "No, don't do it, Mike." And yeah, he suffers every time. But why does that happen is an important question. And if you look, the reason that it happens is because of this. Well, what is lactose? So lact is going to be milk, and anytime you see the word ose on the end of anything, you're going to see that that's a sugar. This is milk sugar. And you guys are like, what the heck does this have to do with anything? I promise I'm getting somewhere with this. So what is lactose? Lactose is a disaccharide. You guys remember this from the last chapter of galactose and glucose. And we need to absorb glucose and we can take galactose into our body. Where do we do that? We do that in our intestines. Well, to do that, we have to break this apart. We have to break it into its monomers. Well, what do we know that we have in our body that helps us break down things at physiological conditions? An enzyme. If you were thinking an enzyme, you got this correct. So you need an enzyme. Well, what enzyme is that? Lactase. That is lactase. So what lactase does is it comes in and it breaks these apart into glucose and galactose, and then we can absorb it into our bloodstream through our intestines. And then we can use glucose for energy. So what happens in people that are lactose intolerant is that they don't have a persistent lactase enzyme. Their lactase enzyme doesn't work. We have them when we're babies, but they usually don't persist. Like we're one of the only species, if you think about it, that will drink milk as adults. I know you guys are saying cats, but I don't think cats are supposed to have milk like that. I think it's bad for them. I'm not sure. Any vets out there, any vet people want to let me know? Just send me an email or put it in the announcements or put it in the discussion. Um, so what is lactase? What is lactase made out of? Lactase is made out of a protein. Cool. So it's made of a protein. Well, what is the most important thing to a protein? The most important thing to a protein is its three-dimensional shape. And what did we know makes the shape of a protein? Well, what are the monomers of protein? What makes a protein? A protein is made up of a combination of 20 or some or all of 20 amino acids. And they make these dipeptide or they make these peptide bonds that hold them together. So And we went over that in the last chapter where you looked at the four basically parts to the shape of a protein. You had the primary, secondary, tertiary, and quaternary. Well, what determines the primary structure of a protein? Well, it's the sequence of amino acids. So it's going to be something like methionine, arginine, lysine, or leucine, proline. Do you guys? It doesn't matter. I'm naming amino acids. I don't know the amino acid sequence shape or amino acid sequence for lactase. But you start putting these in order, and what happens is they're going to fold up into this particular shape. And that shape allows it, there's going to be a little pocket for it to do chemistry. Now, what would happen if one of these amino acids is incorrect? Say it's supposed to be leucine and we put an arginine in there. Well, what's going to happen to the shape of our protein? It's not going to be the right shape. So is it going to work well? No. Okay, we still haven't answered why, though, we get all the symptoms. Well, what happens is you get a protein that doesn't have the correct shape, so it can't break down glucose and galactose, so we can absorb it into our cells, and then it goes into our large intestine. That's what lactose, it gets into there whole. So, what lives inside of our intestines that is possibly going to eat this? We have gut bacteria that live in there. The gut bacteria, what they're going to do is they're going to eat it and they're going to produce gas. And then it's going to push out on the walls. It's going to make you feel bad. It's also going to be osmotic. And so what it's going to do, it's going to pull water in there. So it's going to give you maybe some liquidy poop. And it's also going to make a lot of gas. And gas pushing out against our intestines is super painful. Okay, sorry, got interrupted. So, so what happens is the bacteria eat it and then it pushes out against the intestinal walls. And if you've ever seen a baby that has gas, it's super painful. It doesn't feel very good. Okay, so what does this have to do with cells? They're like, all right, get to the point here. Um, so the question that I have here is, how do we know how? So, sorry, I keep getting interrupted. Okay, so if we look at this, the protein is determined by the sequence of amino acids. Okay, let's all keep that in mind. Let's hold this out. Let's open up another tab in our brain, and let's look at a cell. So a cell is like this. We got our cell membrane, and then we're going to have our nucleus. So what lives inside of our nucleus? Nucleus has DNA. The question I always have for everybody is, what is DNA? Why do we have DNA in our body? And most of you will tell me that, oh, it's genetic material. I say, okay, that's cool, but what does that mean? Like, if your parents have lactose intolerance, like you're most likely to have lactose intolerance. If your parents, have heart disease, there's a chance that you may have heart disease. That's why we ask a family history when we are talking to a patient. You talk to a patient and you're like, "Oh, hey, they always ask about your mom and your dad." And why do they do that? Like, well, it's because you can pass your genes on to your children. And so but how? How does that happen? So if your parents are lactose intolerant, why are you lactose intolerant? Well, what does DNA do? What is the actual, like, real life function of DNA? I'm going to tell you in a second. So the next thing that we have here is a endoplasmic reticulum. And the endoplasmic reticulum, there are two flavors. There is a rough and there is a smooth. The rough is rough because it has what on it? It's got these little structures here that are called ribosomes. These are called ribosomes. Okay, we're almost there. These are called ribosomes. So the endoplasmic reticulum, the rough one, is going to have ribosomes on it. Well, what is the function of ribosomes? Some of you have already told me in the discussion postings. They synthesize proteins. I mean, that's cool and all, but what does that mean? How do you synthesize a protein? Well, what are proteins made out of? We just said it over here. What are proteins made out of? They're made out of amino acids put together in a very particular sequence, right? Every protein has a specific sequence of amino acids. So the ribosomes on our rough endoplasmic reticulum are going to synthesize proteins. But the question that I have is how does it know to put it in the appropriate order? How does it know to put methionine, arginine, lysine, proline in the correct order for that enzyme? Where does it get the instructions to do that? It gets it from your DNA. Your DNA coding, the A's, the T's, the G's, the C's, all that stuff is going to be a code for these amino acids to be in the appropriate order. So you can think of it like this. Your DNA is like a big recipe book of all of the proteins that are in your body. You have tons of proteins in your body. Every reaction that you have is going to be catalyzed by an enzyme, which is made of a protein. You've got keratin in your hair, that's a protein. You got insulin, that's a protein. You got all of those, all of your muscle fibers, like those are the filaments that are inside, the actin and myosin that make you strong. That's that's all protein. So how does the body know how to put them in order? It's got a recipe book for all of those things, and that's what the DNA is. So your ribosomes, they get the information from the DNA that's in the library, and it looks at it and it goes, "Oh, okay, cool. This I can make lactase. I can make hemoglobin." It's got the recipe to do. That's all the DNA is. It's just the recipe to make your proteins. Now, not all of your DNA is doing that. Your DNA is 3.8 billion base pairs long. So A, S, T, G, C, Z, G, 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 A, D, T, 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 like 3.8 billion times. But not all of those base pairs are involved in coding that. Only small sections of your DNA are for that. And that small section of DNA that is going to code for a protein is called a gene. So you can think of it like this. If you ever wanted to get a recipe online and you go and you look and you're like, oh, cool, I want to make fettuccine Alfredo tonight. And you go there and you start with the recipe and you're looking for it. And the person starts with, well, this is my son Billy's favorite recipe, and he just loves it. And we learned this when he blah blah blah, and they just start talking and talking and talking. They're just writing and writing and writing. You're like, where is the stupid recipe as you're going down? Well, the whole recipe, that whole website, never all is the DNA. The recipe is just the gene, like where the money is. That's the section that's going to code to make this protein. So the ribosomes are somehow, which we're going to talk about in a little bit, are going to get that information from the DNA. They're going to get a message from the DNA. Because are you going to go in and take your DNA out of your nucleus? I wouldn't do that. Like if your DNA gets damaged, that's where you get mutations. So we're not going to be able to get the DNA out of the nucleus. We're going to have to make a copy of it, and we're going to have to send it out to the ribosome. We're going to talk about that in 1 minute. Okay, so we went all the way over there just to give you an idea of how the cell functions. So you've got your nucleus. What does it have? It has DNA. Then you have the rough endoplasmic reticulum. What does that do? It has rib. It was so long ago that I paused this. I completely forgot where I was. So we were discussing the organelles. And so just to review real quick, we had the nucleus that had the DNA, ribosomes. The ribosomes are going to synthesize the proteins. They use the DNA as the template to do that. The ribosomes are on the endoplasmic reticulum. That's the rough ER, and they are also in the cytoplasm. There is also a smooth ER that does not. That is going to synthesize your lipids and your steroid molecules. Okay. Now, when that protein is made, just like at a regular factory, it's not ready to be sent out. It has to be packaged up so that it can be shipped. There is an organelle that does that, and that is called the Golgi complex. So, what does the Golgi complex do? The Golgi apparatus is going to take that new protein and so it's a lactase. Imagine that we have this brand new lactase, but it needs to have the finishing touches put on it. It's going to go to the Golgi complex that's going to package it into a vesicle, and then it's going to secrete it out of the cell so that it can go break down some lactose. Now, there's a few other things that we have to look at. This all has to be powered. So we've got a cell, or we've got an organelle in here. This is going to be what makes power inside the cell. That is going to be the mitochondria. So that's making ATP. Then there has to be the garbage team that's going to come through and clean everything up, and that is going to be called a lysosome. That is going to be a lysosome. Lyse means to cut. So lysosome. It's going to cut things up and it's going to get rid of the trash. So we can look here at this. This is from this is from EDAPT here. So here we go. Nucleus, DNA. We're going to have the endoplasmic reticulum, the rough brand, that's going to make proteins. The smooth brand is going to make our lipids and steroid hormones. We have mitochondria that are going to make ATP. We have the Golgi apparatus that is going to take those proteins, it's going to package and ship them, and it's going to secrete them out. And then we have the lysosome. There's a few other things in there. We have things that are called the centrioles. These are going to be important in making with mitosis. They're right here. You can see them in this picture right there. And then we are also going to have proteasomes. And these are like lysosomes, but they break down proteins. Now, the last thing that we see is that inside the nucleus, we're going to have something called the nucleolus. And that I don't believe is on your list here. So it's nucleolus. And what this does, this is the factory of the factory. This is going to make your ribosomes. So it's the ribosome factory. Okay, so what I would be able to do is I'd make sure that I can go through and I would be able to draw a cell like this cell right here, and I would be able to tell me all the functions of all of these organelles. All right, I think that's, I mean, I guess we could look at these here. Let's look. So what do we have here? Ribosomes synthesize proteins. Ribosomes are like chocolate machines in our factory. So I guess they talk about this as being as a factory. So ribosomes of the factory, they're going to make our proteins. What do? They make the proteins out of amino acids. How do they make those amino acids? Well, they get it from the DNA. Golgi apparatus, what does it do? It puts the finishing touches on protein synthesis. Here are the four functions that it does. Then we have mitochondria, powerhouse of the cell, obvious. Lysosomes is going to be the garbage disposals of the cell. They are going to break down cellular debris. They're going to break down bad guys when we absorb them. We also have these things that I didn't talk about are the peroxisomes. These are similar to lysosomes. So what they do is they're going to neutralize free radicals and they detoxify alcohol. So what type of cell do you think where you're going to find these? You're going to find a ton of these inside a liver cell. Lysosomes, here we go. Centrioles, they're going to be involved in mitosis. The nucleus, it's going to be where DNA is. And then inside the nucleus is the nucleolus. And the nucleolus, what does it do? It synthesizes ribosomes. Okay, cool. So that's all this part was.